Okay, so this class we are moving, we just finished chapters 1 through 3, and we're not moving to chapter 4 now, we're moving to chapter 5. I'm going to bring in elements of chapter 4. I already technically have in a couple of places, and y'all just didn't know that I was being sneaky with bringing chapter 4 stuff in. So in this chapter, we're jumping to chapter 5. And we're going to spend quite a few class discussions on chapter 5. We will have a quiz on this chapter when we're smack dab in the middle of it. And so this is going to be like a 2-lesson chapter minimum. And then our third project of the semester is going to cover, you need really good notes on chapter 5 and chapter 6 especially, because our third project of the semester that we're going to do right around midterm, it is going to come from the notes and the chapter 5 and 6 and your notes. Okay, so take really good notes on this stuff. Okay, so chapter 5 is called Making a Living. So I want to open up talking about chapter 5 by looking at this phrase. This chapter was not always called Making a Living. Let me put the word on here that it used to be called a couple of editions of this textbook ago. The title of the chapter used to be Subsistence Strategies. Subsistence Strategies. And this is what we're going to define today and talk about, subsistence strategies. But I wanted to talk about the link between what the textbook authors call making a living and what we're actually going to be studying, subsistence strategies. Okay? So, I need to ask you, when you hear this phrase, making a living, what comes to your mind? Working. Okay, so work. And why do you work?
To make a living.
You get money. And why do you need money?
Buy food, comfort.
To buy things. I heard somebody say buy food in particular. So we want to buy things, maybe food in particular. What else do you want to buy with your money?
Comfort.
Comfort things. Well, okay, here we go. Okay, so I heard somebody say comfort. And did I say want or need? I said want? Okay.
Because what you pay for, what you have to pay for versus what you want to pay for.
Like bills
2 different
and going
things.
shopping.
Okay.
Pay your bills.
Okay, so you think of bills as like a must or need to.
Yes.
This is a must or a need to. And my question used the word want. And so you see a want as like the extra stuff. Like, is that what Lucas was talking about when he said comfort? Want?
I mean, that's something.
Well, when you
Not
pay
really.
rent, that's for comfort to have, and a
Is
lot
it?
of people
I
think.
thought he meant more comfort item,
I did too, but that's
comfort
okay.
is like
Okay, so, and wants, since I phrased the question that way, wants. Like, I don't know, panic room or something like that. Escape room, that's what it's called. The escape room things that we go to, or the trampoline park or something like that you take your kids to. Are these things needs, or are these things extras that maybe you can call them luxuries, right? Okay.
I want to say it depends on what your life is, actually.
It might depend on socioeconomic class. We're getting a little bit more advanced right now than we need to be. We need to just look at our collection of descriptor words for what making a living means to you all, estadounidense people. Okay? So, United Statesian people. Okay? So, Paula, it was you said buying food? Okay. So keep that in mind for just a second. Okay, so what I guess the first thing I need to tell y'all to do, number one, I agree with all of this. Like, this is my list too, okay? Even though we're from very different age groups, this is my list too. I think about making a living, and I'm thinking about, okay, how much do I need for my bills? And so I'm not even going to apply for the job that you've got if it's not going to at least cover my bills and then give me something else for this, because this brings about, like, just peace of mind if you're able to do this for yourself sometimes. just, peace of mind and just a stress reliever kind of thing, right? If you have a little bit, exactly. Okay, so yeah, that's what making a living means to me, means to you. So, since that's what this phrase means to you and me, my first instruction to you in this chapter, if I've never instructed you to do this before, my first instruction to you for this chapter is to forget everything you think you know about what making a living means. Okay? Unlearn, like one of my former students told me, that anthropology class is a lot more about unlearning stuff every day than learning stuff every day. Okay? So unlearn all this really quick because we want to focus on what we mean about in this chapter. I'm just going to kind of erase this a little bit so it's a little more delineated. What we mean in this chapter by making a living is how do we survive today, day to day? What is our plan? That's what a strategy is, right? A strategy is a plan. What plan do we have to subsist? Are y'all familiar with this word subsistence or to subsist?
Yeah.
Okay, some of you are, some of you not. So this is a very good college level vocabulary word for you to have. It's not specific to anthropology. It's just specific to a college vocabulary, okay? To subsist, which is the root word, or subsistence in general, which is a noun. This means to survive from day to day. To survive from day to day. The chapter used to be called Subsistence Strategies. Technically, all this means is this, but since you and I have a very cultural-based definition of this, you've got to unlearn, or at least put it in a little box and keep it to the side for a couple of days of class, in order to learn what subsistence strategies are and what the options for subsistence strategies are throughout history and today in life as we know it, okay, and around the world. Okay, so here's my next question for you. Well, first, any questions from you? We're good? Okay. Here's my next question for you. What does the human animal, Homo sapiens sapiens, like you and me, what do Homo sapiens sapiens need for survival day to day?
Food, shelter, and palatable water.
Good. Food, potable water, and shelter. And by shelter, what do we mean?
Any structure that keeps danger away from us and keeps us from freezing or overheating.
Okay, yeah, shelter. So it keeps dangerous. Okay, so shelter would be like safety. Shelter would be safety. So, maybe today when it's raining cats and dogs outside and maybe hailing, I'm not even sure what's in the forecast today.
Oh, we have a flash flood warning going on.
Yes, we have a flash flood warning going on. We need definitely shelter to keep us dry because keeping us dry keeps us healthier, right? We'll have a healthier time. So we don't necessarily need shelter every single place in the world. When y'all were reading the Yanomami article that you just got finished reading this last weekend, was the description of their shelter in their villages, was it something that sounds familiar to you that we have in our own lives?
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Very different,
I've seen
right?
it before,
Extremely different than what we have in our own lives. So shelter does not have to look the exact same way every single place, right? Inuit, which is a small group that belongs to the overall Eskimo family. You've heard the word Eskimo before. That's a group. That's a term that includes 24 different groups of people. The Inuit are one of them that lives in northern Canada and Alaska. What do their shelters look like that you know of?
Igloos.
The igloos, right? They're going to interact with their environment to find shelter, right? And so they definitely need shelter 24 hours a day and maybe not 24 hours a day, but 12 months out of the year, right? They're definitely going to need shelter. Whereas the Yanomami, do they even have a shelter that has 4 walls and a closed off entrance? Yeah, I mean it's
It's the roof
just a
and the
hut.
poles.
But let's not say just a hut, because that kind of implies that we are we like comparing it to something else, maybe our definition of shelter? So it's a
Or-
hut,
Wait,
right?
couldn't we also be comparing it to better huts though?
In terms of what we're discussing today, let's just go with hut, right? Okay, so we need food, potable water, and shelter, which can also include clothing, right?
Though not necessarily.
Not necessarily, such as the case of the Yanomami, right? You don't necessarily need the same shelter everywhere to survive from day to day. You don't necessarily need the same clothing to survive from day to day. Now, in this way, when we're talking about clothing, and I'm linking clothing to shelter, here's something else that you and I have to unlearn. A lot of times in our society, we choose particular clothing not because of the shelter it provides for us, but for what reason?
That's simple.
The weather, the fashion, right? Those kinds of things. So we, of course, in our culture, clothing symbolizes, back to the 6 components of culture, made up of symbols everywhere, right? Clothing symbolizes something. We maybe use a particular fashion or, body covering depending upon the time of the year. I know I wore my yellow raincoat today. It's made out of some PVC, so it keeps me dry. So anyway, yeah, we have different clothing for different purposes, and but in terms of shelter, we're talking about protection and safety from things that might prevent us from our plan to survive from day to day. Okay? So, I think the word subsistence strategy is defined on the first couple of pages of chapter 5. It's one of the things that's in the margins of your textbook. It says something like a plan, a food getting plan, or something like that.
The pattern of behavior used by a society to obtain food in a particular environment.
Okay, the pattern of behavior in a society that gets food in that environment. Okay, all right, so I'm modifying the definition just a little bit because just to make it clearer, I mean, your textbook author is not incorrect here, but we're going to make it clearer. You need food, but a lot of times you have to make specialized tools in order to get that food, and you have to make specialized tools in order to process that food, and you have to make specialized places or tools or methods in order to cook it or something, or preserve it, right, depending upon. So you have, it's a little bit more complicated, the subsistence strategy, the plan to survive from day to day, than just a food getting strategy. It's a little bit broader than that. And of course, if you don't have potable water, you're gonna die, right? So you've got to have the potable water thing too in order to survive from day to day. And so that definition is correct, but it leaves out a little bit of the clarity that maybe we need, since I told you to unlearn everything that you think you know about making a living. Okay? So subsistence to survive from day to day, what do we need? Here we go. We don't need, manicures and pedicures and PlayStation 4s or whatever. What are we on right now? PlayStation, how much?
I think it's still 4.
Is it still
It's
4? Okay, so we don't, that's not a necessity for survival, no matter what my 8-year-old nephew tries to argue with me about, right? I'm gonna die if I don't get it. No. Okay, all right, so that's what this chapter is all about, subsistence strategies. Questions so far? Okay, so the first thing we are going to talk about in terms of subsistence strategies is we are going to there are five subsistence strategies. Make sure this thing is still on. There we go. There are 5 subsistence strategies, and what we're going to do is discuss each of them individually, and kind of what I'm going to try to do is paint a picture of what your life experience would be like if you happened to live in each of these 5 subsistence strategies. Now, you already know one of the subsistence strategies really, really well because we live it right now. It's the last one that we're going to get to probably on Thursday. Wednesday we'll talk about it. But it's the last one, industrialism. That's the subsistence strategy that you and I know about. You told me a lot about industrialism already when I asked you what does making a living mean. okay? So we have to unlearn all that to get some information about the first four. And what the third project is going to ask you to do is the third project is going to ask you to describe using some scenarios and some descriptions that I provide to you. It's going to ask you to pick what scenario, what description of a life experience, which one goes with which subsistence strategy, 1 through 5. Okay? So you need to focus on these conversations that we're having about these subsistence strategies so that you can describe a day in the life of somebody who lives in that, with that subsistence strategy. Okay? All right. So the first subsistence strategy that we're going to talk about, you might have heard this word before, foraging. To forage. Foraging is the first subsistence strategy. If you have not heard this word before, I'm sure you have heard it's a phrase that means foraging. It is hunting and gathering, yes. Hunting and gathering. And of course, hunting includes fishing too, okay? Hunting includes fishing too. Gathering is not just plants,
Also water.
but animals too. Insects, reptiles, and I think I heard Lucas say it, the potable water also. Hunting and fishing, of course, for animals and either freshwater or saltwater fish or mammals. You can get mammals during fishing expeditions also, right? But gathering, I want to be clear that gathering is not just about somebody taking a basket and going and picking, blueberries or something off of a bush. It's not just gathering berries like. I don't know, it must say that in some cartoons someplace because that seems to be, when I ask people, what do we gather? That's usually the first answer that I get. We gather berries. Well, you have a nice, well-rounded diet, don't you? If that's all you're gathering. Okay, so yeah, gathering can be a whole bunch, can be a whole bunch of different things. There is a wonderful little story in the textbook about the Pintupi women. I think I'm spelling the name right. The Pintupi women going out and essentially gathering this kind of lizard that lives in the ground. They set fire in a circle to the top of the ground where they see these lizard holes, and it gets so hot underneath there. The lizards are like, "Ooh, I'm coming up to the top to get some fresh air," and they snatch them, and there's their supper, right? Yeah. So that's a plan for gathering that particular kind of thing, right? That's part of their diet, and so anyway, gathering can be about animals or insects or even fish. Maybe you made a fish trap, right? And you're not actually going out and actively fishing. You're going out and collecting whatever unfortunate creatures swam into that fish trap that day, right? Okay, so foraging, aka hunting and gathering, but it encompasses a whole bunch of behaviors that you and I, because we are not foragers, we might have foraging activities that we participate in with our industrialism as our subsistence strategy. We might have some foraging behaviors that we participate in, but foragers exist, survive from day to day. Their subsistence strategy is based only on hunting and gathering and those kind of techniques. Yes, ma'am.
But we had to do a prompt for Abnormal Psych about this.
Oh.
And it's saying how women are more likely to be afraid of spiders and snakes and stuff because of this. That back in our ancestor time, that we needed to know don't mess with those, while we were foraging. And so they say today
Okay.
that women are more likely to be afraid of these things because of that.
Okay, so let me address that question really quick about like the current phobias women might have for creepy crawly things. Based on, you didn't use the word evolutionary history, but essentially that's what it was what, abnormal psych? That's what your abnormal psych class taught. Okay, so this is a little bit of a side to answer this question, but it's necessary to answer this question. Okay, so there is a branch of science called sociobiology. And in this case, when you're describing what your abnormal psych teacher, number one, psychology is a lot based on sociobiology. The biology part here, of course, is talking about genetics and heredity and your DNA, and what does it do to what does all that pre-programmed stuff do to bring about our social behaviors, okay? So psychology is a lot about this, you know, and psychology is a huge part of anthropology also. So in your abnormal psych class, they are using the argument, they're using a sociobiology argument that in evolutionary history, because of the gender divide, and we'll go ahead and that is one of the things that you need to know for my purposes about foraging, is that usually men are the hunters in a society. There's a gender division of labor in hunting and gather societies. Usually men, or let me put the word males, so we don't have an age label on this. Usually males do the hunting, and usually that leaves females. Females do the gathering. So that's called a gender division of labor, okay? And so your abnormal psych instructor is working from a theory that says, because of our social conditions in the past, which foraging is the way, it's the only way that any human group survived until about 12,000 years ago. Until 12,000 years ago, foraging was the only method for human beings to survive. It was the only subsistence strategy, okay? And the reason we have this 12,000, I've seen 11,000, I've seen 13,000, I'm putting 12,000 just to split the difference. But the reason we know this, and the reason I can confidently put this on the board, is because the archaeology record, remember archaeology, one of our subfields of anthropology, we, in cultural anthropology, look to what archaeology can prove, and archaeology finds evidence of another subsistence strategy called horticulture, which we're going to talk about next. But horticulture is going to be number 2 on our list. So archaeology has proven through analyzing artifacts, the items that humans have made and modified in the past and left behind, we've proven that about 12,000 years ago was the first time you saw a different subsistence strategy, evidence of a different subsistence strategy than foraging.
Is that about the time of Mesopotamia, or?
Mesopotamia is no, it's a different, it's a completely different subsistence strategy than foraging, much later.
No, I'm talking about horticulture.
No, it's a much later than this horticulture time.
It
Yeah.
seems too recent,
Okay.
though, for it to be a part of our biological makeup. Like, for it to
Okay,
be...
all right. So the evolutionary historians or evolutionary biologists or sociobiologists will claim, that because human beings evolve so slowly, the more complex an organism is, we evolve extremely slowly. We're not like the flu virus that you have to get a new flu shot every single year because the flu virus evolves so quickly, and the ones that this year's flu shot killed, this year's flu shot didn't kill all the little flu critters. It left a few of them, behind that had a resistance or something, or it had a mutation or something, right? So it left a few of them behind, and those very few started making whoopee immediately and started reproducing. And you can put last year's flu shot all in that population of new flu viruses, but it didn't kill them last year. It's not going to kill very many of them this year. So that's why you have to, and the flu viruses are extremely, small scale, not complex organisms. Not right now because I need to move from this. But anyway, so yeah, it might seem like a long time, but this is a blink of the eye when we're talking about geologic history. Okay, so that was an excellent question, and I'm sorry, I'll answer your question later, but I need to move on to cover some more stuff with this. Interesting stuff. Okay, so yes, so foraging has a gender division of labor. I think that's the 5th time I've said that phrase in class today, so please include it in your notes, even though I have not written it on the board. But foraging also has an unusual characteristic that no other subsistence strategy does. Foraging is what we call egalitarian. There is a G in this word. Egalitarian refers to an almost equal division among groups of people in society, not perfectly equal, but almost equal. Almost equal social value, almost equal division of labor, almost equal activities that are assigned in terms of their social value. Egalitarian is the word. And here's why. Even though I've told you there is a division of labor based on gender, the value of males hunting and fishing is relatively equal. It brings to the entire group a relatively equal value to what females do for the entire group. So even though they have unequal job duties assigned to them based on their ascribed status of gender, they have unequal jobs, the jobs have relatively the same social value. Because males who go out and hunt or fish, all of you males in the room, y'all would all go on a Monday morning instead of anthropology class, you would all go out to wherever. If we live on the coast, you'd probably go out to sea and bring a boat full of fish back that we would probably eat the whole entire week. Maybe longer if we had some ways to preserve those fish, right? So the males would have to do that, and the value of that fishing trip would add value to everyone in the society. Those males would come back and not just keep those fish for themselves. Those males got together and went out fishing to bring fish back for the entire community. Okay? They were obligated to do this. Egalitarianism is what they learned in their enculturation process. So there isn't the individualism of, well, I caught that fish. There are no let's measure how long my fish is or how much it weighs or something like that. And that's my fish compared to his fish. You just dump them all in, we're all going to eat them. When females go out, like the Pintupi women, to go out and get all those lizards, I can't remember the name of the lizards that they gather. They don't just gather them just to have it for their women's club. They get them to bring back to the entire village and serve and feed everybody. Okay? So, and in between fishing times, the division of labor is not just that activity of fishing, but maybe processing the fish also. Maybe, definitely, building the boats that are necessary to fish. Definitely making the nets, if that's the way that they catch the fish. Making the nets, making the poles, making whatever it is the tools are that are needed to do that fishing. Those are the male jobs in society. Okay? Foragers, can I erase this now? Okay. Okay, so just to get more space, bless you. Okay, so foragers have a very, very small or low population density. Low population density. Okay, this word is a vocabulary word from chapter 5. So when you're reading early on in the introductory section of chapter 5, when it's just talking about subsistence strategies in general, each of the subsistence strategies that we're going to learn about in this particular chapter have a differing population density in comparison to each other. So in Project 3, when I ask you to sort, and to identify what descriptors go with which subsistence strategy, every single one of these subsistence strategies, I'm going to have one or two population density descriptions that you're going to have to pair up with the correct subsistence strategy, okay? So population density is the number of people, here's my abbreviation for people, the number of people a particular area will support. The number of people a particular area will support. Foragers don't really care about exactly what area. Is it a square mile? Is it a square hectare? Is it a square, what? It doesn't really matter to a forager because there is no land ownership. The concept of ownership is completely foreign, honestly. Foragers really don't have ownership. So for instance, all the guys who need to build a boat to go out and fish together, the guys are going to work on this collectively and build the boat collectively, and the whole village owns the boat, not the guy who designed it or the guys who built it, right? So they build these things, so there's really no concept of ownership of materials or of land. There's a key thing that we really have to back our brains off of what we think about ownership, my stuff versus your stuff. We want a privacy fence between us and the next door neighbor, or the guy who built our apartment complex is going to build thicker walls between you and the apartment that's right beside you so you can have a little bit of separation, right? That's different. Okay, so there's no concept of ownership of items or definitely of land. No concept of ownership of land. Foragers, when foragers think about the land does not belong to a foraging group. The foraging group belongs to the land. That's the mindset, okay? The land is there to support not just the foraging group, but what else does the land support? The animals,
Plants.
the plants. The land supports all the critters, not just mammal animals, right? Because we're going to eat, I didn't erase it. We're going to eat a whole bunch of stuff that the land supports, okay? Plants and animals, you can call that, it's a good college level concept to use. Flora, which is the plant life.
And fauna.
And good. Fauna, which is the animal life. All sorts. Vertebrates, invertebrates, animals, reptiles, amphibians, all these kinds of things. Okay? So they have this concept that the land is what supports all living things. You are a forager. You have a very, very, very advanced knowledge of all of the flora and the fauna that live in the area where you occupy the land also. Okay? Question?
Faunas with a U, not a W.
Thank you for fixing that for me. Thank you. I'm a bad speller. Okay. So anyway, yes. So in a foraging society, in your enculturation process, we said males do the hunting and the fishing and females do the gathering. young children are going to hang out with the females mostly. The older females, who probably aren't able to haul back as much stuff to the village, but the older females have all the knowledge of their entire lifetime of the gathering part and the processing of the gathering part, right? And older males who maybe aren't as capable of going on the hunting or the fishing expeditions, if you want to call the expeditions, are probably in the village or the camp. I should use the word camp instead of village, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Older males who aren't as able to keep up with or provide as much help in successfully hunting and fishing the things that the village needs, they are staying at the camp also and interacting with the younger boys who are also not capable yet of contributing success to the venture. Okay? Did I stop it? Okay, resume. I think it's still going. Okay. So anyway, so the young boys are at home with the older men. All the kids are at home with the older females, and the younger females or the more active females are doing all of these activities. But the young children spend their days not in daycare playing with whatever toys they might play with in daycare, but the younger kids are staying with the older females who are constantly working on the tools needed for their gathering projects. So for instance, if you need to have some sort of vessel to bring back potable water from your potable water source, a pot, for instance, then the older females are teaching the younger females how to make those pots that they will one day use and that the current people who are gathering water are using right now, right? So you're going to get that skill from grandma when grandma is unable to haul water herself. She's also going to probably teach the kids in their enculturation process. They have so much knowledge about flora and fauna. The grandmother is going to teach the granddaughters where are the patches of the best fruits and vegetables and tubers and legumes and all of these things that you and I, when we see these things in the grocery store in our subsistence strategy, we might know what lettuce is, we might know what a potato is, and we might see peanuts, but most of us, and don't answer if you do, that's not the point here, most of us don't know the difference between which one of those things is a legume, and which one is a vegetable, and which one is a fruit, and which one is we don't know these things. In your enculturation process, if you are a forager, you learn this from day-to-day interaction with the people in your camp, okay? You also learn about the reproductive cycles of the animals. Why would you need to know about the reproductive cycles of animals?
So you can know when to hunt and when not to hunt.
It's about conservation, yes. It's about not only knowing when to hunt and when not to hunt, but it's also about knowing how many animals can be placed back into the population in a particular period of time. So if I know that the deer in this area, on average, are going to have about 30 fawn every single year, then I will learn in my enculturation process that men should not harvest more than 28 or 30 deer a year. And probably more of them need to be males than females. Why?
Because a single male can make many different types, but
Exactly.
a single female can only make one.
One or two sometimes, right? Yeah, okay? So yeah, and that's pretty much the only manipulation that I'm going to do to the environment. As a forager, there's very, very little environmental impact. Very, very little environmental impact. Because what I'm going to learn in my enculturation process is all the details about how the flora naturally reproduces, under what conditions, where it exists, and how the fauna naturally reproduces. And I'm going to learn about what plants the deer eat. Because maybe the deer eat some of the same plants that we do, and by the way, they do, right? The deer eat a whole bunch of plants that are also edible for humans. I'm going to have all that knowledge, and so when I find that plant, or when I go and harvest something or gather something, harvest is the wrong word, we mean something different by harvest. So when I go and gather something from that particular plant population, I also have a knowledge that, hey, the raccoons and the possums and the deer and the whatever eat these things too. So you have part of your behavior that you learn in your enculturation process is to respect the fact that the land not only supports you with your human population, but it supports animals with their population. And so if we know that animals are going to eat so much of a plant, and we want some of it too, we can't take all of it. Why?
Because the animals will leave, try to go somewhere else and find
There's a secondary effect. Yeah, the animals might leave. I might lose the animals also, but firstly, I might lose that plant altogether. The ecosystem would be altered. Okay? So you might be thinking right now, some of you might be thinking, hey, why don't they just keep some of the seeds from that plant and just plant it next year in growing season? That's not part of the knowledge that a forager gets in their enculturation process. They're not about manipulating the environment so that it produces unnatural amounts of a food or animal. They don't do that. They gather and they hunt only naturally occurring amounts of these things. And in their enculturation process, they learn very, very detailed things about reproductive cycles, like we said, about things that are edible that you and I might be very ethnocentric about. I checked in my office before I got here, I used to have a big bag of sour cream and onion crickets. Any of y'all ever eaten some? No, I used to have some, but we must have eaten them all last semester. I'll have to get some more and force those on you later on.
I would eat those, but I want them a different flavor.
You would want a different flavor, then you want like cheese and bacon instead of sour cream and onion. Yeah, so yeah, there's tons of insects that are extremely nutritious, edible, low in calories, very high in protein. Tons of insects, tons of reptiles and creepy crawly things that your abnormal psychologist says that women are adverse to because of the gathering behaviors. But there's a whole bunch of things that in your enculturation process you are taught to know the difference in all the different mushrooms and the toadstools in the woods, for instance. So you can know what to eat. That's making noise for a second. Yeah, so that you can know what to eat or how to gather them, how to identify them by sight, where the populations are, what time of the year they grow. You know all of this kind of stuff. In a place like Arkansas, where we are, even though it's pretty darn cold outside right now, and you might not think that there's very many things growing, there are tons of things underneath the ground, tubers underneath the ground, and lots of animals in the woods, if you know where to look for them, that you can still harvest and be a successful forager, 12 months out of the year. Even in a place like Arkansas, when you think, oh, all the plants die and all the birds fly south, or animals migrate or something to find warmer climates, foragers in their enculturation process know how to survive 12 months out of the year on the naturally occurring flora and fauna in an area without manipulating the environment. There's very, very, very little manipulation of the environment. And there's one part of their subsistence strategy that enables them in particular to have very little environmental impact on an area, and that is nomadicism. Nomadicism. What does it mean to be a nomad?
You never stay in one place for
you
long.
never stay in one place.
Yes, nomadicism, to be a nomad means that you are on the move. You do not have what's called a sedentary. You do not have sedentary villages. And that's why I corrected myself a minute ago when I think I was saying village and I changed it to camp. Because really, most foragers, not all foragers, but most foragers do not have permanent villages. Most foragers do not. Most foragers are nomadic. They move around, and they maybe move depending upon what's necessary for your group and where environmentally you're located in the world. Geographically, you're located in the world. Maybe you move with the seasons of the year precisely because. plants are going to die off for the winter. Animals are going to go south so they can find where those populations of plants that they survive on are still available, and so you have to follow where your food supplies are also. Okay? So nomadicism is most often the behavior associated with this subsistence strategy because nomadicism helps us have a smaller environmental impact. You don't ever overtax an environment. It's a much more conservative mindset. Okay? And nomadicism is much easier to do when you have a small population density. The smaller the group, the easier it is for you to pick up and move to the newer places that you need to go for that particular group. They keep the population density low intentionally. Because even though they have egalitarianism, which means every human member of that group has relatively the same social positions, certainly newborn babies are not as useful as even wrinkly old grandma who can barely walk. And there are some foraging communities that when you are wrinkly old grandma and you can't walk and keep up with the nomadicism, that you are obligated to
Sunset yourself.
Sunset yourself, yes. Which is like stay behind and just kind of let nature take its course.
I mean, the Inuits used to do it by setting them out on ice, like floats.
Exactly.
But they haven't done that in a long time.
And I'm trying to remember, there's a name of a group in Fiji. I don't remember, of course I don't remember the name of the group right now when I'm trying to. But anyway, one of my students a while back did some research on it because she was interested in like the value that elderly people have in different cultures. And in foraging, even though we have egalitarianism, and I told you that like the more elder you become, probably the less active participation in hunting and gathering you can have. Elders have the highest social position here, if there is any delineation, because you know all the stuff. You've lived it, you've seen it, you understand. You remember back when there was, we were overrun with grasshoppers and they ate all of the plants that we were, you remember that happened when you were 8 and it hasn't happened since then. Well, how did y'all survive that summer that you were 8? Well, we ate more grasshoppers.
Plus you survived longer than anyone else.
You survived longer than anybody else. You know all of the information about not every plant is edible. Right? Some plants you can use for technical purposes. Technical purposes like maybe you need to make shafts for arrows and this particular tree has the best wood. Or you need to make the bow that you're going to shoot the arrows from, or you're going to make an atlatl, or you're going to make a basket out of reeds or whatever, right? You have all of this technical knowledge about which plants you can use for that. You also have a lot of technical knowledge about which plants are slightly toxic or can be used in a medicinal way. Maybe they're not in a calorie kind of usage for you in your society, but they have a medicinal kind of. If you're cut, you can put it on your cut, and you might not even have known, especially back when all the world was a forager. You certainly didn't know about germs necessarily, but you knew that if you put this poultice or whatever grandma made out of this leaf from that one tree that we can't eat, if we put it on our cut, we're gonna not get infected or whatever.
Panacea.
Right? Something like that. So you have a whole bunch of knowledge from elderly people about how to make all of the tools you need to be successful at getting food, potable water, and shelter in your subsistence strategy. And that includes a whole bunch more behaviors than simply, let's go out and shoot bluebirds today or whatever, which are edible. Illegal for us to shoot them, right? It's illegal to shoot songbirds, okay? But if you're a forager, we don't need any of those laws to protect those songbirds. Because why? Laws exist, there are rules, laws aren't written down, But why wouldn't we need laws to protect endangered species in foraging societies?
Because
Because
there
we
is
don't know
no
what to do.
concept of endangered species.
Well, they don't have that concept because they're a very conservation-minded people.
Is it really illegal to do that?
Yeah, for us nowadays, yes. But in foraging, you learn in your enculturation process to preserve. Never take more than you need. Never take as much as you want if doing that means that you're not going to leave enough for the other animals that need that, right? Never kill more deer than you know are going to be put into the population, and don't even kill that many because some deer die of natural causes, and then a wolf is going to eat them, and then something else, and then one of them falls off a cliff or what, right? You're constantly being mindful of the environmental impact of a tree that you cut down to make that boat that you needed to go fishing. I agree that it's beautiful, but I agree that it's beautiful. Let me stop there. Let me stop there instead of saying anything else. It is, but you and I would have to give up a whole bunch of things that also we probably think are beautiful to be foragers.
I'm not saying I can.
Right. Yes, yeah.
I'm just saying it's beautiful.
Well, our subsistence strategy doesn't usually like this subsistence strategy when it stands alone. And part of it is this ownership of stuff thing. Because we like fences to tell us, let me be snarky and let's say we like border walls to tell us where lines are between things that I own and you own.
I mean, we also like to get how much we put effort into. I mean,
we like something called a surplus. Y'all know this word, surplus? That is also something that foragers do not have, surplus. This word is going to come into play. It's going to be very important for later subsistence strategies that we study. But foragers do not produce a surplus. A surplus is more than the population needs at any one given time. Okay, per year or per day or per week or whatever your time frame is, a surplus is more than what the population needs. So maybe you go out on that fishing trip that I was describing earlier, and maybe you do get more than you need in a day. You have enough for 10 days or something, but you're going to use that up in 10. You're not going to go on another fishing trip until at least that's all used, right? And also, another way in which foragers are extremely environmentally conscious is they eat way more of the plants and animals, way more body parts, that is, than you and I might even think are possible.
I mean, they eat everything.
They eat everything. Like, I mean, just
internal organs,
eyes, tongue, face meat,
nothing
brain.
was weird because it was food.
Exactly. And if you can't eat my skin because if I'm a pig and you can't eat I'm not talking about cannibalism or anything. But if I'm a pig and you can't eat my skin because it's too tough or whatever, you're going to use that for something else. Like maybe you're going to line the boat with that or something because it's waterproof. Or maybe you're going to make shoes, or you're going to make straps to tie things. You know, you're going to use that hide.
I mean, it's like I said,
for
they use
something,
every part of the animal.
Right? They use every single part of the animal. Maybe I'm going to use the hoof to dig for grub worms that are part of my diet, right? So yeah, you don't produce a surplus, and you use every single part of the animal. You use every single part of the tree. If you have to cut a tree down for, to build that boat in the first place, or carve out that canoe, you're going to use all the excess wood from the tree. If it's not for firewood, maybe you're making shafts for arrows, or you're making bedding from the leaves, or something that you're getting. You're not leaving anything unused. So it's very conservation-minded in terms of that. Egalitarian, even though elderly would have like the highest position of respect and knowledge and take care of and part of the community. You know, you don't just plop them in a recliner and never talk to them or something. You know, they're vital members of society, usually until their death or sunsetting period, right? Because of that value that they add to society. Very low population density intentionally because of the often nomadic lifestyle. And also, if you don't produce surplus food, your population density is going to be low. You're going to need to keep it low to be conservation minded. So, and I say you're going to need to keep it low, certainly from abstinence, but also those plants that we were talking about, a lot of plants are abortofactants. That means that it terminates a pregnancy. So, so there's a ton, you have all kinds of knowledge. If you are a forager, you have all kinds of knowledge of all the technical, like what plant can you make a rope out of? What plant is just toxic enough not to kill you, but to kill whatever ails you, or if it's not your turn to have a baby, to make sure that you don't. Right? All of them. And edible. So all of this stuff is what is part of the subsistence strategy. So you see, this is why that definition in the textbook about a subsistence strategy is the practices that we need to do to get food. Yes, but it's more complicated than that. Because you can't eat everything that grows out there. And you can't just kill as much as you want, and you're not getting surplus, and you have to keep this low so that this can happen. And males and females break this job work up, right? So, I think I've covered everything you need to know about a day in the life of a forager. So if I said something like, you are a female and you woke and or you're teaching your granddaughter how to make a basket today so that she can go and get grub worms later with her mother, that's an activity that a female forager would probably. If I said something like, it is the closest thing we've ever had to equality in a society, what's the vocabulary word for that? It's
Egalitarian.
Egalitarian is the closest thing that we've ever had to equality in society. Equality is something that like we really strive for in this society, don't we? Constantly, equality. We need to get better, improve ourselves toward equality. Equality in everything: sexism, racism. We talked about those problems. Ageism. We talked about those problems in a class before, and we're trying to like work toward equality. Well, so far, the only human society that we even come close to seeing equality, and not even there do we see exact equality, we see egalitarianism in foraging, because the value of the work that people do is equal. It's equal. Grandma and Grandpa, we value your work just a little bit more, because you have that historical perspective and that teaching quality that you're going to do. One more quick thing about foraging before we close up is I can't remember. Several different anthropologists, I don't need to remember just one name, but several different anthropologists have called foraging not only the closest to equal society that we can observe, but also the only affluent society, a society where everyone is affluent in that society. Do y'all know the word affluent?
Yeah.
What's that mean?
I don't.
Well off.
Affluent means well off. So just to be a little philosophic, in this day and age, in our subsistence strategy, which is called industrialization or industrialism, usually we think of somebody who's well off has a lot of leisure time to do stuff that they want to do rather than stuff they have to do to pay those bills y'all were telling me about when we first started. Yeah, so affluence technically equals leisure time. And if leisure time is a mark of affluence, then foraging wins, because almost every single person in a foraging society has a whole bunch of leisure time, because there's only so many calories an individual needs in a day. And it really doesn't take long when you have as much knowledge as they do about the flora and fauna that's available in the area, and how to avoid having a negative environmental impact, and how to adapt to environmental changes. Like the grasshoppers were terrible this year and they ate a whole bunch of this. Well, our plasticity is going to allow us to just eat more of them that particular year, right? So because of that, it doesn't take very long to collect the food that you need to survive in one day. And what do you want to spend the rest of the day doing? Anything you want. Sitting around, talking to people, and making bows and arrows by the fire, and chatting and telling jokes and singing, and making a musical instrument, or doing any of these kinds of things. Again, it's, I hope I'm not making it seem too idyllic, because they have their share of problems, right?
I mean, Sad's area wasn't great.
I'm giving up my life to become a forager.
Well,
I'm big enough. I
don't
gotta
quit your
probably
day
do
job
something
until you
figure
think
it
you're
out.
doing until you
Good
think
luck
you're doing
getting
well.
hot water.
Oh, by the way, let me
I'll
tell
figure it
you.
out.
Let me tell you that if you're doing a reaction paper on foraging for this particular week, which is what your topic is, that you can do that. When you're looking up foraging, when you're searching for this online, you're going to see a whole bunch of modern day uses to the word foraging. Like, for instance, there's something called urban foraging, which essentially is somebody who lives in our subsistence strategy that you and I know of, but they live in the city and they go dumpster diving, essentially. I'm simplifying it quite a bit, but they go around to restaurants on the day they know the restaurants are cleaning out the stuff from the refrigerator, and let's say that there's a head of lettuce or something and the outside leaves are brown and yucky looking. Well, urban foragers gather that kind of stuff that's tossed, and they peel away the unusable parts until you get to that core of that head of lettuce, and you can still use it, for instance.
Are you talking about homeless people exclusively?
No.
Or
Urban foraging is like a communism kind of movement in the cities where people get together and do this intentionally to share it with everybody, whether you're homeless or not, or whether you've got a penthouse in Manhattan, you can be an urban forager. So foraging is part of every single subsistence strategy. All the other 4 that we haven't covered yet, foraging is part of the other 4, but foraging stands alone in the ways that we have described today. Okay? All right. Thank you. Funny?